how it might get shaped by something like this. And even if in the end it's not economical, it would still be an exercise that would be worth pursuing, because people would think about things and learn things about sort of how to think about the future of the Commonwealth that wouldn't necessarily be there otherwise.
Let's move on to tax and spending policy. Dan, why don't we start with you in this room?
Forbes magazine has said we're the highest cost state in the continental United States. Part of that is
Thankfully, we're finally #1 in something.
labor costs, energy costs, and taxes. What would you do to make Massachusetts more competitive in this area?
Charlie, let's start with you.
Let's start with energy costs, because given where we're located, I think our focus on energy should be on efficiency, because efficiency is the biggest single opportunity for win-win you get when you're talking about energy. There's a company located, I'm not exactly sure what direction I'm facing. It's in the neighborhood, called Enernoc, which is a demand management company. And put simply, Enernoc basically provides its customers with 3 big products. It purchases electricity for them on their behalf as a bulk purchaser. Secondly, it runs sort of a very aggressive management, energy management program for its customers day in and day out. And then third, when energy prices and energy utilization peak, it has all kinds of mechanisms built into its relationships with its customers to limit the amount of demand that they need to draw at that point in time. And the reason this one matters so much in energy, the typical cost today, normal day, cost of a kilowatt hour is probably somewhere around 12 or 13 cents per kilowatt. When you have to buy energy during peak pricing times, when it's 95 degrees in the summer and everybody and their brother has their air conditioning on in the middle of the day, it's like $4. So the spread between what you pay for energy on a typical day and what you pay for it on a peak price day is staggeringly different. And Enernoc, because they are in the business of managing this activity aggressively on behalf of its customers, when we were over there last week, they said they've reduced the amount of electricity that their customers have used over the course of the past several years by about 16 gigawatts. Now, 1 gigawatt is about the annual output of a nuclear power plant. So what do you get if you're pursuing a strategy like the Enernoc strategy? You get the same productivity, your electricity costs are significantly lower, and you get a big benefit associated with the fact that you don't have to build additional capacity that you don't need. And I really think our focus as a state, I can't get everybody to buy Enernoc, but my point here is I think one of the things we need to do far more aggressively as a state is develop policies and strategies that are all about energy efficiency, because that's our biggest opportunity to reduce the cost of electricity for everybody.
Mark?
I think Charlie's right. Energy is a big driver in the cost here. But look what we've done recently with the gas tax. I mean, the cost of gas, everyone here in this room has gone up, and the liberals in the state want it to be indexed to inflation. We've also had a tax that was, thank God, repealed, the tech tax. Again, the cost of things in the state is high because of our government overburdening some rules and regulations. In regard to energy, again, Cape Wind, we still don't know how many of our taxpayer dollars have gone into that project. And we're not allowed to know. This is not government. This is not good government. We should be using our taxpayer dollars wisely to make investments in energy that will reduce the costs, and not into these bad-funded industries like Evergreen Solar and Cape Wind.
Charlie, quickly follow up on that. Index the gas tax?
No, I'm against indexing the gas tax. I think when we elect legislators to vote on stuff, right? One of the things we expect them to vote on is tax policy. The legislature wants to raise the gas tax. The legislature should vote to raise the gas tax. But the whole idea of sort of saying that the gas tax goes up automatically forever without the legislature ever having to vote on it again is a really bad idea. And by the way, the other reason why this question is important for your audience and for others, the way the legislature wrote that question, is if inflation actually goes down, the gas tax doesn't go down. The only direction this thing goes is up, which is a pretty clear indicator about what people intended with this.
And to be clear, build Cape Wind or don't build it?
Well, at this point, I mean, I opposed Cape Wind 4 years ago for a whole bunch of what I thought were pretty good reasons. It was a no-bid contract. The price of electricity is about 3 times what people would normally pay for it, and there were other ways to do, I think, better things that could have reduced our energy draw and our carbon footprint, like stuff like Enernoc, which is much more economically competitive. But at this point, I think every major decision that can be made by the Commonwealth of Mass has pretty much been made.
Build Cape Wind?
We put a moratorium on it until we find out how much of our taxpayer dollars have gone into that project. And then once we know that, if the voters think it's a good idea, let's go forward. If not, let's not do that. By the way, well said, Charlie, about the gas tax. I mean, spoken like a true Republican. Exactly.
Bruce Holmes.
This is a question about what is a tax. There's a question on the ballot to expand the bottle deposit law. And it's also kicking around the legislature as it has for many years in the past. The Speaker of the House says it's a tax, and he opposes it. Where do you guys stand on this?
I'm with the Speaker on that one. I think the expansion of the bottle bill is a tax. I mean, let's face it, it is. And it's basically, I look at that as nothing more than a revenue grab, and I'm opposed to it.
This is something Charlie and I can both agree on. Interesting thing, though, it's a ballot question, so the voters can get to decide. I mean, I couldn't be any more in favor of that.
Mark Fisher, you've taken the Grover Norquist no tax pledge. Why did you do that? Charlie Baker, would you take the pledge? If not, why not? Mark?
We do not have a revenue problem in this state. We have a spending problem in this state. It's an interesting thing that the liberals that run this state feel that to raise revenue, they have to raise taxes. And yet, it was President Kennedy, Democrat President Kennedy, not that long ago, who told us that you raise revenues by cutting taxes. By cutting taxes. It puts more money into our wallets and pocketbooks. We stimulate the economy. That drives growth. That's President Kennedy's words, not Mark Fisher's words. That's why I've taken no new tax bill.
I'm not going to raise taxes if I'm fortunate enough to get elected governor. Let's get that straight. But my one concern with the no new tax pledge is it might imply that I think the way the tax code is currently written is exactly the way it should be written. If there are opportunities to simplify the tax code, if there are opportunities to do things to make the tax code more sensible and more understandable, let's talk about regulations that are complicated. There's probably nothing more complicated than the tax code. Then I would like to have the ability and the flexibility to pursue those opportunities to reform the tax code.
Rick Domino.
Yes, Mark, and you had mentioned this much thought about liberalism in this state. I can't believe that you're suggesting that. But fiscal conservatives know that you have to pay the bills when the bills come due. And likely, they're there to suggest that there should be ways to pay those bills. Well, the bills are due on our transportation infrastructure. There's a $20 billion gap in the state of repair in the state. There's also a significant set of challenges associated with the bridges in the state, with over 50% of them being structurally deficient. Jeff Jacoby wrote an editorial today, because if you think there's enough money already in the transportation to pay for all this, there isn't. And he was suggesting that maybe if we don't want to do the gas tax, and we don't want to have indexing to help deal with the insane inflation rate of transportation construction costs, then how will you pay to keep the transportation system in a state of safety and repair in this Commonwealth? And how will you pay? This was 1,000 acres of vacant land. The Seaport Access Road, the Silver Line, and the access to the Ted Williams Tunnel created the opportunity for a close to 30 million square feet of development here. Those kinds of opportunities exist in every single gateway community in this Commonwealth, and they need some transportation infrastructure. So, how are you going to pay for this fiscally conservative-minded people?
Mark? That's an absolutely wonderful question. Absolutely wonderful question. And my answer is in 2 parts. With regard to the turnpike pays for itself. What do I mean by this? All the rest stops on the turnpike, the billboards, the rest stops, the gas stations, the food eateries, all the revenue that they generate more than pay for the yearly maintenance on the turnpike, and then each and every year generate $20 million in surplus. Okay, that's great. The turnpike pays for itself. But what about these other bridges and roads that are falling apart? And I couldn't agree more. Let's look what's happened in Wisconsin. Another fiscal conservative, Scott Walker. What's he done? In 3 years, he took tens of billions of dollars worth of debt in that state and turned it into a $1 billion surplus. And he's trying to find out ways to give it back to the people. How do you do that? You make your state business friendly. People get off the dole onto the payroll, and tax revenues go up from the payroll taxes. The state coffers get filled, and that's how you pay for bridges and roads. It's worked in Wisconsin. We don't have to recreate the wheel here. We just have to have the courage to implement fiscal sound policy. It works.
Charlie Baker.
I mentioned a couple of other things. I mean, Massachusetts, for years, Massachusetts has spent a lot of its available capital resources on what most people would think of as operations. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. How many people here commute in and out of Boston on the Southeast Expressway? Really? The answer there is all those people are still stuck in the traffic. So you know those big Jersey barriers that they move back and forth every day to create the zipper lane? Massachusetts has been paying for those for the past 10, 15 years with capital money. But most people would argue that that's an operating expense. The grass that gets cut alongside the highways, capital money, not operating funds. This is like the equivalent of having a project that you want to do to fix something in your house. You take out a home equity loan, but instead of doing that, you use the home equity loan to pay your mortgage or buy groceries or something like that. It's bad fiscal management, it's bad behavior, and it's not small money, it's big money. And one of the real sort of silver linings in the whole transportation reform bill that passed a couple years ago was this commitment that Commonwealth made to get all this operating stuff onto the operating budget and off the capital budget, which I fully 100% support, which could translate into some serious money made available to be spent on what it should be spent on, which is projects that have a shelf life of 20 or 30 years or 40 years, instead of using your credit card for all intents and purposes to finance your operations.
Mark Fisher, I wanted to equalize time here a little bit.
I agree with Charlie. I'd go a little bit further. He talked about a number of different budgets. There's a secret, a well-known secret on Beacon Hill. We have a balanced budget amendment. The problem is, the budget that they're talking about only accounts for about 60% of spending. Well, we're in debt, not because, how can we be in debt with a balanced budget amendment, and yet we are, $98 billion. That's because other off-budget spending is driving us into debt. The State House has this crazy system of multiple budgets, off-budget things, to say that we balance the budget. We're lying to the citizens of Massachusetts. Let's put everything on the budget, and when we say balance, it means balance. That's the way you live in your household, that's the way you balance your checkbook. We have to do it for businesses, or they would go under. We have to do it in Massachusetts, or we will become Detroit choosers.
Quick point of comment.
The only other thing I'd say back, Rick, in response to your comment, I mean, I do think the fact that Turnpike Authority is going to an open road tolling system and getting rid of sort of the old-fashioned way of collecting tolls.
Not if I have anything to say about it. The tolls are coming down.
Well, but my point here is that the cost of collection will drop dramatically. When the cost of collection drops dramatically, the ability to spend money on actually doing projects again goes up. I think one of our great problems in this state is we haven't thought as hard as we should about the things we need to do to actually put money to work. And that's, I think, in some respects, a big opportunity as well.
Let's stick with transportation and infrastructure. Bruce, question?
Yeah, here's a project that's on the drawing board, South Coast Rail, commuter rail to New Bedford and Fall River. Where do you folks stand on building this very expensive project, and is it worthwhile?
Mark, why don't you start?
I used to commute to Avon from Shrewsbury. I go down 495 and up 24, and 24 is a nightmare. Almost any time of the day.
Stays below 15 minutes.
Weekly, there's a med-flight
press the
helicopter
button.
in there to take somebody
See the red button?
crazy with a crash in
Press it
Boston.
to stop, and it
It's a
says you
nightmare.
restarted. Okay?
Here's the thing. If the people on the South Coast Shore want